The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the city park. Leaves crunched underfoot, and the air carried that crisp, clean smell that only comes in late autumn, cool enough to make you pull your jacket tighter, but not so cold that you'd rush indoors. Around the edges of the park, people moved at their own pace, joggers with earbuds in, parents pushing strollers, couples sharing coffee from paper cups. Near the grand old music hall at the park's edge, a small crowd spilled out onto the sidewalk, still buzzing from the afternoon's performance. They were dressed nicely, suits, scarves, polished shoes, the kind of people who bought tickets weeks in advance and discussed composers like old friends. One man adjusted his cufflinks while laughing at something his friend had said. Another woman checked her phone, smiling at a message. They hadn't noticed the girl sitting on the bench near the public piano a few yards away. She'd been there for nearly an hour, watching them, her stomach growling so loudly it almost drowned out the distant chatter of the city. She wasn't dirty, exactly, but she looked tired in a way that went deeper than just needing sleep. Her clothes were clean but worn thin at the elbows and knees, and her backpack, stuffed full and zipped shut with careful precision, looked like it had traveled hundreds of miles. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid, strands escaping around her face. She kept her eyes down most of the time, but when she did look up, there was something sharp and quiet in her gaze, like she was used to watching the world without being seen. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. A half-eaten apple from a dumpster behind a bakery, and before that, a bowl of soup at the downtown shelter. Her body ached with hunger, but more than that, it ached with silence. For days she hadn't touched a piano, not a real one anyway. She'd pressed her fingers against tabletops, humming melodies under her breath, trying to keep the music alive inside her. But it wasn't the same. Music needed keys. It needed resonance. It needed to be heard. Now here was a piano, right in the open under a canopy of golden leaves, free for anyone to play. It was one of those community pianos the city had installed a few years back, part of some arts initiative. Most people ignored it, or used it as a place to set their coffee while they checked messages, but she knew what it could do. She'd seen others play on it, amateurs mostly, fumbling through Furley's or pop songs with one hand. But this piano, it still had soul. She could tell by the way the wood gleamed in the sunlight, by the slight wobble of the middle C key she'd tested earlier when no one was looking. She took a deep breath. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from hunger and something else, something deeper. She stood up slowly, brushing dust off her jeans, and walked toward the group near the music hall steps. They hadn't noticed her yet. She stopped a few feet away, just outside their circle of conversation. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice softer than she intended. It cracked slightly, unused to speaking to strangers. The group turned, surprised. One man raised an eyebrow. A woman glanced at her backpack, then quickly away. She swallowed. Can I play for a piece of food?" Silence. Then, laughter. Not cruel laughter, not at first, but the kind people use when they're caught off guard, when something doesn't fit into the neat box of their afternoon. The man with the cufflinks chuckled, shaking his head. "Play on that old thing?" He nodded toward the piano. "Sure, kid, go ahead." "Impress us," his friend smirked. "Yeah, if you can make that piano sound like anything but a dying cat, I'll buy you a sandwich." More laughter. They thought she was joking. Or maybe just another street kid looking for spare change, using music as a gimmick. They didn't see the way her fingers curled slightly at her sides, as if already feeling the weight of the keys. They didn't know that for her, music wasn't a trick, it was breath. She didn't argue. Didn't explain. She just turned and walked to the piano. The bench was cold. She sat down, adjusted her posture the way her first teacher had taught her a lifetime ago. Back straight, shoulders relaxed, wrists floating like birds above the keys. She closed her eyes for just a second. In that moment, the park faded, the laughter, the hunger, the worn soles of her shoes. All that remained was the silence before the first note. Then she played. It started softly. A single note, held just long enough to shimmer in the air. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the melody unfolded like a story no one had heard but everyone understood. Her fingers moved with a certainty that defied her ragged clothes and sunken cheeks. This wasn't amateur hour. This was something else entirely. She played Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, a piece full of storm and sorrow, of longing and grandeur. Most teenagers wouldn't dare touch it. But she didn't just play it, she lived it. Every chord carried the weight of sleepless nights on park benches, of walking miles just to find a library with a keyboard, of practicing silently on a cardboard piano she'd drawn with a marker during the worst winter months. The music swelled, then pulled back, then surged again like waves crashing against a shore that refused to break. People stopped walking. A jogger slowed to a halt, earbuds dangling around his neck. A mother turned her stroller around. The group that had laughed moments before stood frozen, their smiles gone. One woman's hand drifted to her chest as if holding her heart in place. The piano, often dismissed as a dusty relic, came alive under her hands. The notes rang clear and deep, echoing off the stone steps of the music hall. Birds paused in the trees. Even the wind seemed to hush. When she reached the final chords, those thunderous, aching harmonies that feel like both an ending and a beginning, she didn't rush. She let them hang in the air, vibrating through the park like a prayer, then silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the whole world had forgotten how to breathe. Then someone clapped. Just one person at first, a man in a delivery uniform who'd been passing by. Then another, then more. Soon a small crowd had gathered, clapping not out of pity but out of awe. Someone shouted, "Encore!" Another called, "Who are you?" She didn't answer. She just sat there, hands resting lightly on the keys, her chest rising and falling quickly. Her eyes stayed down, focused on the piano, as if afraid that if she looked up, the moment would vanish like smoke. The man who'd joked about the sandwich stood apart from his friends now, his face unreadable. He walked over slowly, stopping a few feet from the bench. He didn't say anything at first. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a wrapped turkey sandwich, still fresh, probably meant for his own lunch. He placed it gently on the piano lid. "Here," he said, his voice quieter now. "You earned it." She looked up at him then, really looked. Not with gratitude, not with shame, but with quiet dignity. She nodded once. "Thank you," he hesitated. Do you play professionally?" She almost smiled. "I used to." Before he could ask more, she stood, picked up the sandwich, and slung her backpack over one shoulder. She didn't linger for praise or questions. She turned and walked away, not quickly, but with purpose, back toward the edge of the park, where the city's noise swallowed her once more. But she left something behind. Not just the memory of the music, though that would linger in the minds of everyone who heard it, but a question, unspoken but heavy in the air. How could someone so talented be so unseen? As the crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring to each other, pulling out phones to show friends what they'd just witnessed, the piano sat empty again. But it didn't feel abandoned. It felt like it was waiting. And somewhere down the street, a girl with a sandwich in one hand and a lifetime of music in her bones kept walking. Still hungry, yes, but no longer invisible. Not after today. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched, and in the quiet that followed, the city felt a little different, like it had just been reminded that greatness doesn't always wear a spotlight. Sometimes it wears worn-out sneakers and asks for nothing more than a chance to play. The piano keys felt like home, not the kind of home with walls and a roof. She hadn't had that in a long time, but the kind that lives in your bones, in the way your fingers remember what to do even when your mind is too tired to think. When she played, the world outside didn't disappear exactly. It just shrank. The hunger, the cold, the constant worry about where she'd sleep that night, they all faded into the background like static on a radio tuned to a distant station. Only the music remained, clear and true. But as soon as her hands left the keys, reality rushed back in. The sandwich sat on the piano lid, wrapped in wax paper. She picked it up, the warmth of it surprising against her palm. She didn't eat it right away. Instead, she walked to a quieter corner of the park under a big oak tree whose leaves had mostly fallen, leaving bare branches that scratched at the sky like fingers. She sat on the ground, back against the trunk, and unwrapped the sandwich slowly, as if it might vanish if she moved too fast. The first bite tasted like more than food. It tasted like dignity, like being seen, not as a problem to be ignored, not as a ghost drifting through the city's edges, but as someone who mattered, even if just for 3 minutes and 20 seconds of music. She pulled the white card from her pocket. It was slightly crumpled from being tucked away all night, but the number was still clear. She didn't call, not yet. But she kept it close, like a promise she wasn't ready to break open. After a simple breakfast of oatmeal and toast in the shelter's dining room, she wandered back to the music room. The keyboard was still there, waiting. She sat down and began to play. Not for anyone, not for food, not even for herself, really. She played because it was the only way she knew how to say what she couldn't put into words. She didn't notice the staff member standing in the doorway until the song ended. "That was beautiful," the woman said softly. She was in her 50s with kind eyes and a clipboard in hand. "I've heard a lot of people on that keyboard. Most are just messing around, but you listen to the notes." The girl nodded, unsure what to say. "I'm with the outreach program," the woman explained. "We help young artists who've fallen through the cracks. We connect them with teachers, instruments, sometimes even scholarships." She paused. "Elena called us this morning. Said you might be stopping by." The girl's heart skipped. So Elena had followed through. Not with demands, not with expectations. Just a quiet act of care. "She said you used to study seriously." The woman continued. "Is that true?" "Yes," the girl said. "Before everything." The woman didn't ask for details. She just nodded. "We have a rehearsal space downtown. Real piano. Tuned every month. If you'd like, you can come by this afternoon. No strings. Just play." It sounded too good to be true. But after yesterday, maybe good things were possible. That afternoon, she took the bus downtown, clutching her backpack like a shield. The rehearsal space was above a bookstore, up a narrow staircase that smelled of old paper and wood polish. Inside, sunlight streamed through tall windows, and in the center of the room sat a grand piano. Black, gleaming, perfect. She walked to it like it was sacred ground. She played for 2 hours straight. Bach, Chopin, Debussy, then back to Rachmaninoff. Her fingers, stiff from cold and disuse, slowly remembered their strength. The music wasn't flawless. There were missed notes, moments of hesitation, but it was alive. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was playing for survival. She was playing for joy. The outreach worker listened from the doorway, then quietly slipped away, leaving her alone with the piano and the light. Later that evening, as she walked back to the shelter, a man on the street corner held out his phone. "Hey," he said, "is this you?" He showed her a video. A shaky phone recording, but unmistakable. Her at the park piano playing Rachmaninoff, the crowd gathering, the sandwich on the lid. The caption read, "Homeless girl stuns city with piano genius." Her stomach dropped. "Where did you get that?" "Everyone's sharing it," he said, grinning. "You're famous." She didn't feel famous. She felt exposed, vulnerable. What if people came looking for her? What if they thought she was faking it? What if someone tried to take advantage? She hurried back to the shelter, heart pounding. That night she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw faces. Some kind, some curious, some hungry for a story they could sell. She'd spent so long trying to disappear. Now the whole world seemed to be watching. By morning, the video had thousands of views. Local news stations picked it up. Headlines called her the piano ghost and the girl who played for bread. Strangers posted comments. "She must be lying. No homeless kid plays like that." Others wrote, "This broke my heart. How is this happening in our city?" One comment stood out. It was from a verified account. "I know this young artist. She is real, and she is extraordinary." It was signed with just initials, EM, but the girl knew. Elena. That same day, Elena came to the shelter. She didn't arrive with cameras or reporters. Just a paper bag with 2 sandwiches and a thermos of tea. She found the girl in the music room practicing softly. "I saw the video," Elena said, setting the bag down. "I didn't post it. Someone else did. But I wanted you to know I defended you. Because your music doesn't lie." The girl looked up, eyes tired but steady. "I didn't want this," she said. "I just wanted to eat." "I know," Elena said gently. "But sometimes truth has a way of rising to the surface even when we try to bury it." They sat in silence for a while, sipping tea. Then Elena said, "There's a performing arts high school here. They have a program for students who've faced hardship. Full scholarship. Room, board, private lessons. They saw the video. They want to meet you." The girl shook her head. "I can't go back to school. I'm behind. I don't even have transcripts." "You have your hands," Elena said. "And your ears. And your heart. That's more than most, but what if I fail?" The girl whispered, "What if you fly?" Elena countered, Over the next few days, the outreach program helped gather what little paperwork she had. A former teacher from her old conservatory sent records. Elena wrote a letter of recommendation that made the girl cry when she read it, words like resilience, artistic integrity, and one of the most gifted musicians I've ever encountered. The school agreed to an audition, not in a formal hall, but in their practice room, just her and 2 faculty members. No audience. No pressure. She played the same Rachmaninoff prelude from the park. But this time it was different. Not born of hunger, but of hope. She played like she was stitching her past to her future, note by note. After the last chord faded, one of the teachers wiped his eyes. The other simply said, "When can you start?" She moved into the dorm a week later. Her room was small but clean, with a window that looked out over the city. They gave her a new backpack, notebooks, even a winter coat. And down the hall in the practice wing, there was a piano with her name on the schedule. At first, she felt like an imposter. The other students wore designer headphones and talked about summer festivals in Europe. They'd never slept on a bench or eaten from a dumpster. But they didn't treat her like an outsider. When she played in the common room one evening, they gathered around not to gawk but to listen. One girl brought her coffee the next morning. "You play like you've lived 100 lives," she said. "It's kind of amazing." Slowly, she began to trust again. Not everyone, but enough. Elena visited every Sunday. They'd sit in the campus garden talking about music, life, loss. Elena never pushed. She just showed up. And that meant more than any grand gesture. One afternoon, the girl found a package at the front desk. Inside was a set of sheet music, brand new, crisp pages. On the cover, handwritten in elegant script, "For the one who plays with her soul." No name. Just a heart. She knew it was from Elena. As the weeks passed, her playing deepened. She started composing. Short pieces that blended classical structure with the rhythms of the city, the clatter of trains, the hum of streetlights, the quiet sigh of someone sleeping on a bench. Her teacher encouraged her. "Your voice is unique," she said. "Don't try to sound like anyone else." At night, she'd lie in bed and think about her parents. She'd imagine them sitting in the audience, smiling that quiet, proud smile they always gave her after a performance. She missed them every day. But now, instead of shutting the music out, she let it carry their memory forward. One evening, she called Elena, not for help, just to say thank you. "I didn't do much," Elena said over the phone. "You saw me," the girl replied, "when no one else did." And that, more than anything, was the gift. The video kept spreading. National news picked it up. A famous pianist shared it with his millions of followers, writing, "Talent doesn't need a stage. It just needs a chance." Donations poured into the outreach program. More kids got help. More pianos were placed in shelters. But the girl didn't watch the comments anymore. She didn't need validation from strangers. She had her music. She had a bed. She had people who believed in her, and most importantly, she had a future, not as a homeless prodigy, but as a musician. Just a musician, learning, growing, creating. One rainy afternoon, much like the night her parents died, she sat at the piano in her practice room. She didn't play Rachmaninoff or Chopin. She played something new, her own composition. It started softly, like footsteps in the rain, then built into something strong and tender, full of sorrow and light. When she finished, she placed her hands in her lap and smiled. She wasn't playing for food anymore. She was playing because she was finally home. Trust didn't come all at once. It never does. It arrived in small moments, like the first time she left her sheet music on the piano in the practice room and came back to find it exactly where she'd left it, untouched. Or the morning a classmate slid a thermos of hot chocolate onto her desk without a word, just a nod and a smile. These weren't grand gestures, but they were real. And after months of watching her back, of flinching at sudden movements, of expecting the worst from every kind offer, those tiny acts of quiet kindness began to rebuild something inside her, the belief that maybe the world wasn't always out to hurt her. Still, old habits clung like shadows. She kept her backpack zipped tight even in her dorm room. She double-checked the locks at night. She never borrowed money, not even for bus fare, because debt felt like a chain. And though the school provided meals, she sometimes saved half her lunch in a container, just in case. Just in case the floor fell out from under her again. Her teachers noticed. not with judgment but with care. One afternoon, after a particularly intense rehearsal, her piano instructor sat beside her on the bench. "You don't have to prove anything here," she said gently. "You're not on trial. You're allowed to rest." The girl looked down at her hands. "I'm afraid if I stop, I'll lose it all." "Lose what?" "Everything. The room, the piano, the chance." Her teacher placed a hand on her shoulder. "This isn't charity. It's recognition. You earned your place here. Not because of a video, not because you were hungry, but because you're brilliant. And brilliance doesn't vanish just because you take a breath." Those words stayed with her. Slowly, she began to loosen her grip. She started eating all her meals. She left her backpack by the door. She even joined a small ensemble, 3 other students who played violin, cello, and flute. At first, she barely spoke during rehearsals, just played her part and left. But over time, they started joking around, sharing snacks, staying late to try new arrangements. One evening, they played a piece they'd written together, a blend of classical and something newer, freer, like city rain meeting moonlight. When they finished, they all just sat in silence for a moment, smiling. No one said good job, they didn't need to. The music had already said it. Elena kept her Sunday visits, but they changed too. Less about catching up, more about just being. Sometimes they'd walk through the campus garden, talking about composers or the way autumn light hit the library windows. Other times they'd sit in silence watching birds land on the fountain. Elena never pushed for details about the past, never asked how she was adjusting. She just showed up, steady as sunrise. One Sunday, Elena brought an old photo. It was from the youth competition years ago. Her on stage, small in her blue dress, hands hovering over the keys, eyes closed in concentration. Her parents stood in the front row, beaming. "I kept this," Elena said. "Not because I thought you'd come back, but because I knew you mattered." The girl held the photo for a long time. She didn't cry, but something inside her softened, like ice finally melting after a long winter. As the semester went on, her playing changed. It wasn't just technically sharper, though it was, but deeper. Her phrasing had more space, more breath. She wasn't rushing to prove herself anymore. She was listening to the music, to the silence between notes, to the quiet voice inside her that had been drowned out by fear for so long. Her teacher encouraged her to compose more. "Your life has given you a language most musicians spend lifetimes trying to find," she said. "Don't waste it," so she wrote. Short pieces at first, fragments of memory set to sound. One was called Bench at Dusk, built around a simple melody that repeated like footsteps fading in and out. Another, Library Keys, used staccato notes to mimic typing and page-turning, then melted into a flowing line that felt like escape. She played them for her ensemble. They loved them. "This is yours," the violinist said. "No one else could write this." That meant more than any praise. Then came the invitation. A local arts council was hosting a benefit concert for youth homelessness. They wanted her to perform, not as a curiosity, not as the girl from the video, but as a featured artist. They'd even offered to let her premiere an original piece. She froze when she read the email. Performing again on a real stage with lights and an audience felt like stepping off a cliff. What if she froze? What if she forgot the notes? What if people only came to gawk? She talked to Elena that Sunday. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "Ready for what?" Elena asked. "To be seen like that again?" Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're not the same person who played in the park. You're stronger, and your music isn't just for you anymore. It's for the kids still out there wondering if anyone hears them." That hit her hard, because she remembered those kids, the ones who slept under bridges, the ones who traded chores for a meal, the ones who carried their whole lives in a backpack and never asked for more than a chance. She said yes. Preparation began. She chose to play 2 pieces, the Rachmaninoff Prelude, the one that started it all, and her new composition, which she'd finally finished and titled Bread and Keys. It began with a single hesitant note, like a question, then a simple melody, warm and human like someone offering a hand. Midway, it shifted into something more complex, layered with dissonance and longing, echoing the chaos of life on the streets. But it always returned to that first melody, stronger each time, until the final chords rang out clear and sure. Like a promise kept, she practiced for hours, not out of fear but out of respect for the music, for the story it carried, for the people who needed to hear it. The night before the concert, she couldn't sleep. She walked to the practice room, sat at the piano, and played Bread and Keys one last time. When she finished, she realized someone was standing in the doorway. It was the school's head of music, a tall man with silver hair who rarely spoke to students unless it was about technique. He didn't clap. He just said, "That piece, it's going to change lives." She didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded. The day of the concert, the theater buzzed with energy, not the stiff, formal kind, but something warmer, more alive. People came not just for music, but for hope. Volunteers from shelters, social workers, donors, teachers, and yes, a few curious onlookers who remembered the video. Backstage, she dressed in simple black pants and a soft white shirt. No fancy gown. She wanted to look like herself, no costume, no act. Her hands were steady. Then her name was called. She walked on stage. The lights were bright, but she didn't squint. She sat at the grand piano, took a breath, and began. The Rachmaninoff came first. But this time it wasn't born of desperation. It was an offering, a tribute to the girl she'd been, the one who played for a sandwich, who carried music like a secret flame through the darkest nights. Every note was precise but also tender, like she was holding her younger self in her hands. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, but she didn't smile yet. She turned to the audience and said, just loud enough for the front rows to hear, "This next piece is for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." Then she played Bread and Keys. Halfway through, she saw them, two teenagers from the outreach shelter sitting near the back, eyes wide, a woman who ran a soup kitchen, tears on her cheeks, and near the front, the man who'd given her the sandwich, now sitting beside Elena, both of them utterly still. In that moment, she wasn't performing. She was speaking, and the whole room was listening. When the last note faded, there was silence, deep, full, sacred. Then the audience rose, not in polite applause, but in something closer to gratitude. Afterward, people lined up to speak to her. Not for autographs, but to say thank you. "My son's in a shelter right now," one woman whispered. "Hearing you, it gave me hope." A young boy, no older than 10, tugged his mother's sleeve and said, "I want to learn piano too." She didn't have answers for them, but she gave what she could, a smile, a nod, a promise to keep playing. Later backstage, Elena found her. They didn't say much, just stood together for a moment watching the empty stage. "You did it," Elena said softly. "No," the girl replied. "We did." And in that simple truth, everything changed. She wasn't alone anymore. She never had been. Not really. Music had kept her company. Kindness had found her, and now she had a chance to pass it on. That night, she didn't dream of falling. She dreamed of flying, not with wings, but with notes rising above the city, carrying light to every dark corner she'd once called home. The morning after the concert, she woke to sunlight streaming through her dorm window and the quiet hum of the city waking up outside. There was no fanfare, no crowd, no flashing lights, just the ordinary peace of a new day. And yet everything felt different, not because she'd been on stage, not because people had clapped, but because for the first time in years, she felt like she belonged exactly where she was. Not as a story, not as a symbol, but as herself. Someone who played piano, who was learning, who was healing. She didn't check her phone right away. She knew it would be full of messages, some kind, some curious, maybe even a few from strangers wanting something she wasn't ready to give. But today she chose stillness. She made her bed, washed her face, and walked down to the practice room before anyone else was awake. The piano waited, silent and patient. She sat, placed her hands on the keys, and played nothing at first. Just let her fingers rest there, feeling the cool smoothness of the ivory. Then softly she began to improvise, a simple line rising and falling like breath. It wasn't for an audience. It wasn't for a video. It was just for her, and that was enough. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. School continued. Rehearsals with her ensemble grew more playful, more daring. They started experimenting with blending classical pieces with spoken word and ambient sounds, city noise, rainfall, even the clink of silverware in the dining hall. "It's like your life," the cellist said one afternoon, but turned into music. She smiled. Maybe that's what art was supposed to be. Not perfection, but truth. Elena still came every Sunday, but now their walks often ended at a small cafe near campus where they'd share tea and talk about everything and nothing. One day, Elena handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter from a National Music Foundation offering a summer residency, a 6-week program for young composers, fully funded, held in the mountains. "They saw your piece," Elena said. "They said it moved them." She read the letter 3 times. Then she looked up. "What if I'm not ready?" Elena stirred her tea. "You were ready the day you asked for a piece of food in exchange for music. You just didn't know it yet," she applied, and was accepted. That summer changed her again, not by fixing her, but by giving her space to grow. Surrounded by other young artists who'd also known loss, struggle, or silence, she didn't have to explain herself. They spoke in melodies, in late-night jam sessions under the stars, in the way someone would leave a new chord progression on the piano for another to finish. She composed more there, pieces about resilience, about memory, about the quiet courage it takes to keep going when no one's watching. When she returned to school in the fall, she carried that summer with her like a secret strength. Months passed. Seasons turned. She graduated from the performing arts program with honors, not because she'd become flawless, but because she'd learned to play with honesty. At the ceremony, Elena sat in the front row, holding a single white rose. Afterward, they hugged for a long time, neither saying much. Words weren't needed. But the story didn't end there. Because music, real music, doesn't live only in concert halls or on recordings. It lives in the spaces between people. And she remembered that. With help from the outreach program and a few generous donors, she started a small initiative. Keys for All. Every Saturday, she'd go to different shelters, community centers, even parks, and set up a portable keyboard. She'd invite kids, anyone who wanted, to come play. No auditions. No judgment. Just open keys and open hearts. At first, only a few came. A shy boy who'd never touched a piano, but loved how the notes sounded. A teenage girl who used to play before her family lost their home. Slowly, more joined. She didn't teach them to be prodigies. She taught them to listen, to the music, to themselves. One rainy Saturday, as she packed up after a session at a youth shelter, a small voice stopped her. "Can I play for a piece of food?" She turned. It was a girl, maybe 10 years old, thin and wide-eyed, clutching a wet hoodie around her shoulders. Her breath caught. The words were so familiar they felt like a mirror. She didn't laugh. She didn't hesitate. She just smiled and said, "Of course. But how about this? You play and I'll make us both lunch." The girl blinked. "Really?" "Really." They sat together at the keyboard. The girl played a simple tune, just 5 notes repeated, but she played it like it mattered. And in that moment it did. Later, as they ate peanut butter sandwiches at a folding table, the girl asked, "Do you ever get scared no one will listen?" "Every day," she admitted. But then I remember, music isn't about being heard by everyone. It's about being true to yourself. And sometimes that's enough to reach the right person. The girl nodded, as if storing that away for later. That night, back in her apartment, yes, she had her own place now. Small but hers. She sat at her upright piano, the one she'd saved for months to buy secondhand. She played Bread and Keys again, but slower this time, softer. Not as a performance, but as a prayer. She thought about the park, the hunger, the laughter that turned to silence. She thought about the sandwich, the card with a phone number, the first note she played in that rehearsal room above the bookstore. She thought about all the hands that had helped her, not by pulling her out of the dark, but by sitting with her in it until she could see the light again. And she thought about the little girl at the shelter, asking the same question she once had. Maybe that was the point of it all, not just to rise, but to reach back. A few months later, she received an invitation to perform at the same music hall where it all began. Not as a student, not as a charity case, but as a guest artist. The program included works by living composers, and hers was listed 3rd on the bill. Bread and Keys, world premiere, revised. The night of the concert, the hall was full. Not just with donors and critics, but with faces she recognized. Shelter staff, outreach volunteers, kids from her Saturday sessions, even the man who'd given her the sandwich, now with his daughter beside him. And in the front row, Elena, older now, her hair more silver than gray, but her eyes just as kind. She walked on stage in a simple dress the color of dawn. No grand entrance, No dramatic pause. Just a quiet step toward the piano, a breath, and then her hands on the keys. She played the Rachmaninoff first, this time not as a plea, but as a tribute. To her parents, to the girl she'd been, to everyone who'd ever played in silence hoping someone would listen. Then came Bread and Keys. The audience leaned in. They knew the story now, but the music told it better than any headline ever could. When the final chord faded, the silence lasted longer than usual. Then one by one, people stood. Not all at once, but gradually, like waves rolling in. Soon the whole hall was on its feet, but she didn't bow right away. She turned to the audience and said, her voice clear and calm, "Music saved my life, not because it made me famous, but because it reminded me I was still human. If you have a gift, any gift, don't hide it, share it. Even if all you're asking for is a piece of bread." After the concert, she didn't go to the reception. She walked outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered like distant stars. She stood near the old public piano, the same one from that autumn afternoon years ago. It was still there, a little more worn but still playable. She sat down and played a short, gentle piece, just for the night, just for herself. A few passers-by stopped. A couple held hands. A street vendor paused his cart. No one recorded it. No one shouted. They just listened, and in that quiet moment, under a sky full of stars and streetlights, she felt whole. Not because she'd overcome everything, she hadn't. Some days were still hard. Some nights memories still ached, but she'd learned to carry them not as weights but as notes in a larger song. She stood, brushed her hands on her dress, and walked away. Not toward fame, not toward escape, but toward tomorrow. Toward the next note, the next student, the next chance to say, through music, "You're not alone." And somewhere, in a shelter or a park or a quiet room with a keyboard, another pair of hands would soon find the keys. And the music would begin again. The city never sleeps, but sometimes it hums in a gentler key. A year after the concert at the music hall, she found herself standing in front of a small community center on the east side, not the polished part of town with galleries and coffee shops, but the part where laundromats double as meeting places and bus stops become stages for street poets. This building had once been a hardware store. Now its windows were covered in bright murals painted by local kids, and the sign above the door read, "Open Keys, Music for Everyone." It was her project. Not flashy, not funded by big donors, just a quiet space born from a simple idea. If music had saved her, maybe it could hold someone else up too. Inside, the air smelled like old books, floor wax, and the faint sweetness of someone's cinnamon tea. Folding chairs were arranged in a loose circle around a baby grand piano, donated by a retired teacher who'd seen her perform and said, "This belongs where it's needed." Sheet music lay scattered on a table, alongside notebooks filled with scribbled melodies from students who'd never written music before but now couldn't stop. She wasn't here to perform today. She was here to listen. Every Tuesday and Thursday she held open sessions, no registration, no fees, no auditions. Just walk in, sit down, and play. Some came to learn chords. Others just wanted to press a key and hear a sound that wasn't tied to worry or noise or survival. A boy with headphones around his neck played hip-hop beats on a keyboard, trying to layer them with classical arpeggios. A grandmother visiting her grandson shyly asked if she could try Twinkle, Twinkle on the piano, something she'd always wanted to do but never had the chance. She helped them all. Not as a star, not as a prodigy, but as someone who remembered what it felt like to stand outside looking in. That afternoon, a teenager lingered near the door, backpack slung low, eyes scanning the room like they were measuring risk. She recognized that look, the same one she used to wear. She didn't call out. She just kept tuning a slightly off-key upright in the corner, giving the newcomer space to decide. After 10 minutes, the teen stepped inside. "Is it really free?" they asked, voice low. "Free to come in," she said. "Free to try. Free to leave if it's not for you." The teen nodded, then walked slowly to the piano. They sat, hesitated, then played a few notes. Clumsy, unsure, but full of something raw and honest. She smiled. "You've got a good ear." "Used to mess around on my uncle's keyboard before he sold it," they said. "Haven't touched one in 2 years." "Well," she said, pulling up a chair beside them, "let's see what your hands remember." They spent the next hour working on a simple blues progression. No pressure, no judgment. Just two people and a piano, building something note by note. Later, as the teen packed up to leave, they paused. "You're that person, aren't you? From the video?" She didn't flinch. "I am. People say you went from sleeping on benches to playing in fancy halls." "I did," she said. "But the music was always the same. It was just waiting for someone to listen." The teen looked at the piano, then back at her. "Do you ever miss the old days?" "Not the hunger," she said softly. "Not the fear. But I don't forget them either. They're part of my song now." The teen nodded like that made sense. Then they left, but not before slipping a folded piece of paper onto the piano bench. Later she opened it. On it, in messy handwriting, "Thanks for not making me feel small." She tucked it into her journal, right next to the old white card with Elena's number, now worn soft at the edges. Elena was still part of her life, though their roles had shifted. Now it was Elena who sometimes came to her for advice, about teaching, about aging, about how to keep believing in art when the world feels loud and cruel. Their Sunday walks still happened, but now they often ended at open keys, where Elena would sit in the back, eyes closed, listening to students play with the same quiet awe she once gave to a girl in a park. One afternoon, Elena brought news. "The city's expanding the public piano program," she said, stirring honey into her tea. "They want your input. They're calling it the Bread and Keys Initiative." She laughed. "They named it after my piece? They said it captures the spirit. Music as nourishment, not luxury." She agreed to help. Not for recognition, but because she knew what one piano in a park could do. She'd lived it. Over the next few months, she worked with city planners, musicians, and community leaders to place pianos in libraries, transit hubs, even outside shelters. Each one came with a small sign. "Play, listen, belong." And below it, a QR code linking to free beginner lessons, many of them recorded by her and her students. The first new piano was unveiled in a neighborhood that hadn't had a music program in over a decade. On opening day, kids gathered around, hesitant at first, then bold. A little girl, no older than 6, climbed onto the bench and played "Mary Had a Little Lamb" with fierce concentration. The crowd clapped. She beamed. Watching from the edge of the sidewalk, she felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer ordinary beauty of it. This was the real encore. Not the standing ovations, not the headlines, but this. A child feeling brave enough to make a sound in public, and being met with kindness instead of silence. Back at Open Keys, things kept growing. A local instrument repair shop started donating refurbished keyboards. A retired choir director volunteered to lead vocal sessions. Even the city symphony sent musicians to mentor once a month. It wasn't perfect. Funding was tight, space was limited, and some days felt overwhelming. But it was alive. And then came the letter. It arrived on a rainy Tuesday, tucked between bills and flyers. The return address was from a small town 3 states away. Inside, on lined notebook paper, a message. "I saw your video when I was living in my car. I played guitar, but I'd stopped because I thought no one cared. Your music made me pick it up again. I got a job. I'm in school now. I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't just play piano that day. You gave people permission to hope." There was no name, just a postscript. "I played for a piece of food once too. Now I play for joy." She read it 3 times. Then she pinned it to the bulletin board in Open Keys, right beside the schedule and a photo of her first student's recital. That night, she sat at her piano at home and played nothing from memory. She just let her hands wander, creating something new, lighter than bread and keys, more like sunlight after rain. She didn't title it. She didn't need to. A few weeks later, she got an unexpected visitor. It was the man from the park, the one who'd laughed, then given her the sandwich. He stood in the doorway of Open Keys, looking older, softer around the edges. "I didn't know this was yours," he said. "It is," she replied. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. Instead, he said, "My daughter's been coming here. She's 12. Says you helped her write her first song." She smiled. "She's got a great ear." He looked around the room at the kids playing, the murals on the wall, the piano with its chipped paint and perfect sound. "You turned that moment into something real," he said quietly. "No," she said. "We all did. You gave me a sandwich. Someone else gave me a card. A teacher gave me time. A city gave me a piano. This," she gestured to the room, This is what happens when people choose to believe in each other. He stayed for an hour listening. When he left, he slipped a donation into the jar by the door. Not much, but enough for new strings and a few music books. As the months passed, she began to understand something deeper. Healing isn't a finish line. It's a circle. You receive, you grow, you give, and in giving you heal again. She still performed sometimes, small venues, benefit concerts, schools. But her favorite moments were the unrecorded ones. Teaching a kid to play their favorite pop song, staying late to help someone compose a lullaby for their baby sister, or simply sitting in silence with a student who just needed to know someone was there. One evening, as she locked up open keys, a young boy ran up to her breathless. Miss, I wrote a song." He held out a crumpled piece of paper covered in pencil marks. She sat on the steps with him and helped him translate his scribbles into real notes. It was simple, just a melody in C major, but it was his. When they finished, he looked up, eyes shining. "Can I play it for you?" "Of course," she said. He played. It was shaky. He missed a note. But he didn't stop, and when he finished, she didn't clap. She just said, "That was yours." And it mattered. He grinned like he'd just discovered a secret. Walking home that night, she passed the original park piano. Someone had left a single sunflower on the bench. She smiled, touched the petals gently, and kept walking. The city hummed around her, cars, voices, distant laughter. But beneath it all, she heard something else. The quiet, steady rhythm of people choosing kindness one note at a time. And in that sound, she found her forever home.